Imagine waking up to find a government minister's old social media posts resurfacing. Posts using some of the most offensive language from South Africa's painful past. That's exactly what's happening right now, and it has sparked outrage across the political spectrum. ActionSA has officially lodged a complaint with the South African Human Rights Commission against Sports, Arts and Culture Minister Gayton McKenzie, accusing him of making racist remarks, including apartheid-era slurs. And they're not stopping there. They're also ready to take this fight to the Equality Court if needed. So, what exactly is at the heart of this controversy? It all goes back to social media posts McKenzie made as far back as 2013. In them, he used the K-word multiple times, a term that is not just deeply offensive, but also carries the heavy weight of decades of systemic oppression and racial abuse. Even more controversially, McKenzie reportedly defended his use of the term, calling it purely descriptive. Those comments have resurfaced, and they're now colliding head-on with his current position as a high-ranking government official. For ActionSA, this is about principle. The party says leaders in government must be held to the highest standards, and that racist language, whether from 10 years ago or yesterday, has no place in South Africa's democratic society. They argue that using such language is not just inappropriate, but potentially a violation of constitutional values and human rights. That's why they've taken the matter to the Human Rights Commission, an independent body tasked with investigating discrimination and promoting equality. But why also consider the Equality Court? This is important. The Equality Court has the legal power to make binding rulings on hate speech, unfair discrimination, and harassment. It's not just about naming and shaming. It's about legal consequences that could include fines or mandatory sensitivity training. ActionSA seems ready to test that route if they feel the Human Rights Commission process isn't enough. Diversity expert and leadership development practitioner Brian Mlanga has been weighing in on the matter. He says this isn't just about one man's words, it's about the message it sends to society. For Mlanga, leadership is about setting the tone for a nation. When someone in a powerful position uses or defends racial slurs, it risks normalizing hate speech and undermining reconciliation efforts. He also points out that historical context matters. The K-word is not just a random insult, it's tied directly to the machinery of apartheid, designed to strip Black South Africans of their humanity.
All right, let's now bring in diversity expert and leadership development practitioner, Mr. Brian Mlanga, to also weigh in on this matter. Brian, it's great to have you with us on this matter, sir. Good afternoon. So let's look at the historically accountability versus, of course, the present intentions. How do you see this particular incident being addressed in Parliament? Because the court of public opinion, wow, he has already been found guilty, depending, of course, on which side of the spectrum you make your observations.
Yeah, good afternoon, Alicia, and thank you very much for having me. We're living in very interesting times, and I think there is merit to the public demanding that he be held to account, right? And this is done around the background of the removal of the previous Ronaldo. I mean, he also had remarks that were anti-black to some extent, and what that taught us is that it has created a precedent that people who think in that manner and in that way have no place in leadership, especially within the South African context. So I think there is merit to people wanting him to be held accountable, because such kind of thinking and use of language is unacceptable. Worse, coming from somebody who claims to be rehabilitated, it actually shows that the rehabilitation has not taken place.
And very interesting, Brian, that Mr. Ronaldo Geys there, I think I saw a tweet, hopefully it's from his account, we stand to be corrected at this point, where, remember, Gayton actually had protected and said we need to forgive him and move on. This was also a time when he was still young, right? And Mr. Geys in his tweet actually said, you know what, this is exactly the type of labeling and behavior as well as language that I was actually expelled for. So maybe the same should actually happen to Mr. Gayton McKenzie.
There is truth to that. We cannot have different standards for different people, right? What we are saying is this is a kind of language that does not build a country. This is a kind of language that literally violates, even if we want to go the whole legalistic route, it violates multiple legal and ethical frameworks. Number one, the Constitution. Number two, it even violates the Executive Members Ethics Act, and so he should be held to accountable. We can't just be extending grace to somebody who is not who's not being held responsible for his actions and his language. We don't have space for such language within the country. We can't tolerate it.
And
we can't.
And Brian, for Minister McKenzie to defend himself, so to speak, by saying, but I'm a black person, so I can call others black Africans black. But we know in this context, he is identified largely in the country as a colored South African. So I'm sure you've also seen the general public's views, right, on the various platforms there where he did defend himself, and others in his defense calling him non-racist, and that those tweets are also old in terms of parliamentary ethics as a minister. Then has he violated these? If yes, what should happen to him? He is supposed to be the face of unity as well as social cohesion, as you alluded to earlier.
Yeah, and correct. Whilst he might, in South Africa, within the context of South Africa, he probably is identified, and he identifies as a colored person, right? So there are different schools of thought that when it comes to issues of diversity and race relations. So one of the schools says because of what racism is in and of itself, it then says people of color cannot be guilty of being racist. However, the other side of the token is that speech that he uttered, and those tweets are anti-black, right? And those tweets are actually denigrating black people on the other hand, right? And he has to be held accountable for that. So whether within the context of South Africa, we would say, is it racist or not racist is a different story, but it's hate speech and it's anti-black to its fullest, and we cannot tolerate it. It actually dehumanizes black people to some extent.
You know, Brian, the sensitivity of racial undertones when referring to certain racial groups in a country with a long and volatile historical racial divide as ours, and the reluctance in addressing these race matters publicly will unfortunately not bring us to a solution, right? So the national dialogue is said to be coming up. How should this be openly dealt with? Because reality is, in people's homes, Brian, you and I, we know, these are conversations that we know, that they continue making these racial inferences against certain groups, although not in public. Their kids are still very much being steered towards some sort of racial bias. But when and how do we end this?
So, Alicia, it talks to, there is need for that conversation. So, I mean, in principle, the national dialogue is, I think I approve of it, but possibly how it has been constituted and how it's moving, and with all the politics that we've been seeing around it now, there are probably some challenges around it. But we go back. Yes, we might use that language in our households, Alicia, but that language is indefensible. It's corrosive, actually, to the principles upon which our democracy is built, right? It actually spews bias and prejudice. And we need to be able to call each other out when we find ourselves engaging with one another with such kind of language, because it actually puts other people on the other side of the spectrum where they're on the receiving end of prejudice, discrimination, and marginalization. And I don't think we should have that within the context of South Africa. There is no space for that.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, Brian, let's talk about the fact that, of course, when he started this whole thing, it was criticism against a certain podcast, right? And looking at what was said there versus some of the tweets that we've now seen, of course, that have come back to the fore, a lot of people have been calling the minister a hypocrite, but he's still defending those tweets that they were not meant in that context. But how are we supposed to interpret these tweets, specifically as Black South Africans?
Actually, those tweets we cannot ignore them. He did make those utterances. He did make those assertions on that platform, and we need to hold him accountable. Actually, what he did say then, actually, if you look at it from somebody who's positioned himself as a defender of the colored community, in response to the insensitive remarks that have been made, what he did then is actually even more worse than what the podcaster did. Actually, if you look at it, right, he knows better, and much is expected of him, and we can't allow him to go around masquerading like that. So he has to take full accountability and full responsibility for his words back then. And I think this is why the public went and dug those things, because now he's displaying double standards. Right, he's displaying double standards, and I think South Africa is just saying to him, "Listen, take it easy," and they're going to hold him to account. So that grace that had been extended to him, right, is no longer being extended to him anymore. And in a context where we are a wounded community, we're a wounded country, that shows a lot of insensitivity. And I go back to the element that I made, to the point that I made. He's supposed to be a rehabilitated person, but those words which were made in some years after he had left prison actually demonstrate that he had not been rehabilitated at all. So I think what is good for the goose is good for the gander.
Ooh. Brian, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your input this afternoon, Mr. Brian.
The timing of all this is significant, too. South Africa is still grappling with deep divisions, and the language leaders use can either bridge those divides or deepen them. Some critics of McKenzie say that regardless of when the posts were made, there's been no genuine public apology or acknowledgement of the harm caused. Others argue that people can change and that mistakes from over a decade ago shouldn't automatically end a political career. But the key issue here is accountability. Can a public leader continue to serve effectively when such words are part of their public record, especially if they stand by them? For ActionSA, the answer is no. They're framing this as a test case for how seriously South Africa takes its constitutional promise of non-racialism. If a minister can use apartheid-era slurs without consequence, they say it sends a dangerous message that racism is negotiable, and that's something they're not willing to accept. As this case unfolds, all eyes will be on both the Human Rights Commission and potentially the Equality Court. Will there be legal consequences? Will Minister McKenzie issue an apology? Or will he continue to defend his language? And perhaps, most importantly, how will South Africans respond to yet another reminder of how words from the past can still shape the politics of today? One thing is clear, this is more than a political fight. It's a test of South Africa's commitment to building a society where the wounds of the past are not reopened by the leaders of the present. This story is just beginning, and it's one you'll want to follow closely.